Senator Thune, thank you so much for taking the time to come to the station today and speak with us a little bit. I appreciate it. I want to start with, I wanted to get to Ukraine and Russia, obviously, eventually, but you just put out a statement regarding President Biden's Supreme Court nominee. I just want to get your thoughts on that and what you think the process is going to look like going forward.
Right. Well, this nominee, we've said all along, will get a respectful process. It'll be thorough, obviously, and we'll want to examine not only her qualifications, but her judicial philosophy, temperament, all those things that are really important to serving on the court. But it will be, unlike the way Democrats treated some of our more recent Supreme Court nominees, a respectful process. It'll be thorough, but the confirmation process, she will get fair treatment.
There's been a lot of talk on your side of the aisle about not legislating from the bench. Have you seen anything in this particular judge's history that you've seen so far that might have you think that there is some issues there, or is it something that still needs to be looked at?
Well, I think it'll get looked at. She, she's just recently went on the D.C. circuit, so she had been a lower court judge, district court judge, and just recently got confirmed to the D.C. circuit. So she hasn't been there for very long, and but we'll have an opportunity to look at the cases, the way she's ruled, factors she takes into consideration to determine whether or not she is in fact somebody who will be a referee, call balls and strikes, an umpire, I guess you would say, and apply the law and the Constitution in an impartial way, in a fair way. And that's really what you want in a Supreme Court justice. And that's, at least from my standpoint, somebody who will exercise judicial restraint, somebody who doesn't try and legislate from the bench. But I think we'll have an opportunity in the weeks ahead, obviously through the confirmation process, to ask a lot of those questions, to examine her record now that we have a nominee, and we will. I mean, like I said, it's not going to be, this won't be easy. It shouldn't be. This is a lifelong appointment to the highest court in the land, something that has enormous consequence for the country. And so we want to make sure that as we go through the process that we are fair, that it's a respectful process, but also that it's thorough. And so examining her judicial qualifications, her philosophy, and her record, if you will, with respect to the question of whether or not she is someone who's going to legislate from the bench, or who wants to step on the scales, so to speak, or somebody who's going to be an even-handed person who applies the law and the Constitution in an impartial way and really does call balls and strikes. And that's, again, that's what I look for. My early impressions are, she's somebody who I think probably has good qualifications, but the other questions we'll have to answer.
That was, it was thought that was going to be sort of the major pivot of the Biden administration in the month of February, selecting the Supreme Court nominee. Things have changed since then, obviously. The major global news, Russia began its invasion of Ukraine a couple nights ago, Wednesday night here in the States. That would have been Thursday morning over in Kiev in Ukraine. What can you tell us about the latest developments as far as you know as the Senate Minority Whip?
Well, we're going to get a classified briefing on Monday when we get back. We did hear last night from Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of the Treasury, a lot of the top administration personnel, and obviously everybody's watching this very carefully as things proceed, hoping that at some point there might be an off-ramp. And there's been some indications that Putin might want to meet and talk about possibly, a path forward that would de-escalate the situation. I hope that to be the case, but I think we have to, with him, assume the worst. And that is, we got to be prepared, and we have to do everything we can to assist the resistance militarily in Ukraine, and then also make it as painful as possible when it comes to the economic consequences of this decision for Putin. I make no mistake about it, he's not a victim here, he's the aggressor. This is a blatant power grab and invasion of a sovereign nation, and something that we really haven't seen literally for almost 100 years. You have to go back sort of the beginning stages of World War II to see a time when in Europe, at least, you have one country invading another sovereign country. So big consequences, not just in that immediate region and in the immediate time frame, but as you look down the road, what this could mean if he is successful and if he isn't met with strong resistance. The other parts of the world are watching. Obviously, this has implications for China as we look at what's happening there in Taiwan. But I think first and foremost, isolate him as much as possible, make him pay a huge economic price, and particularly for him and his cronies, those oligarchs that he's turned into billionaires. And I think one of the ways you do that is through energy, because people have described Russia as a gas station masquerading as a country. I mean, energy is his entire economy, and I think we can hit him hard there. And then do everything possible with our NATO allies to support Ukraine, and I think that's giving them everything we can in terms of military aid, intelligence capabilities, training. If you think about, a model for this, and I look back to, Afghanistan when the Russians went in there, we supported the Mujahideen, gave them weaponry and assistance and everything else, and eventually Russia decided the price was too high, and they pulled out. So, I think this is a case where you need to see unity from the alliance, and we have something today that we didn't have back in 1939, and that is we have a NATO. And there are a whole lot of countries who are invested heavily with almost 2 million troops available to be called upon if needed, and lots of air assets and naval assets. And so, hopefully that's not what happens here. This shouldn't escalate, but if we can make this costly and make Putin pay a price, both in terms of casualties and economically, he may think twice about this. But it has implications, obviously, immediately for Ukraine, but also for if you're Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, Poland, Romania, countries on the border there. Everybody's going to be thinking about if this were to spread, who's next? And I think we have to think long and hard about that and make sure that NATO's takes a tough stand here, and it seems like that's happening. I'm encouraged by what I've seen. I haven't seen NATO this united in a long time.
As you mentioned, this is going to have implications here on the United States energy supply as well. Gas prices expected to go up because of this conflict. There are many in the Republican Party who have suggested in the time since this invasion that this would be a good time to revive the Keystone XL pipeline. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure. I mean, I think that was I support it. I think that was a big mistake in the first place. It was really the first thing the president did when he took office was kill the Keystone XL pipeline after literally hundreds of millions of dollars had been invested. And if you think about it, it's bringing energy from an ally, from Canada, a friend, through a pipeline and getting it to places that we need it here in the United States. Some people say, well, some of it's going to be exported and some of it may be. But what it does is it creates more supply. And what we need right now is more supply domestically and in the global market as well. And we have it here in the United States. And I think one of the big lessons that hopefully will come out of this is don't disarm when it comes to energy production. And that's what we've done. I mean, the Biden administration, when they took power, in addition to killing Keystone XL, has taken lots of areas out of production. And so, we have enormous resources here in the United States. They have been so bent on their climate agenda, on their green agenda, on pushing everybody into electric vehicles to the exclusion of liquid fuels. And liquid fuels, whether you like it or not, are going to be necessary for a long time for our economy. There may be a day somewhere down the road, far in the distance, where people are driving electric vehicles, but at least today, we're going to need gasoline. We're going to need some of those traditional energy resources, and we have an abundance of them here in the United States. All we have to do is start creating, instead of putting heavy-handed regulations on those and taking things out of production, creating incentives for people to invest. And you'll get investment going again, you'll get production going again, you'll get supply going again, and America can be energy independent and actually help assist other countries around the world, including those in Europe who are overly dependent upon Russia, meet their energy needs. I mean, this is a no-brainer in my view, and I'm at a loss as to why the administration, even biofuels here in South Dakota, I haven't been able to get their attention. I've asked twice now the president to sit down with me and a dozen other senators to talk about biofuels and the contribution they can make not only to the fuel supply, but also reducing greenhouse gas emissions, because they burn so much cleaner than traditional gasoline. And they just have shown no interest. I think this obsession with electric vehicles has become consuming, and to the detriment and exclusion of everything else that could help significantly in not only the price of a barrel of oil and a gallon of gasoline by increasing supply, but also help clean up the environment. This was, in my view, an avoidable situation.
President Putin mentioned in his speech as the invasion was about to take place. He warned Western nations not to get involved, saying there'd be severe consequences, and he also mentioned Russia's nuclear capabilities. Mm-hmm. What kind of alarm should be raised about that, and what do you see from his rhetoric from your standpoint?
Well, I think that, invoking Russia's nuclear capabilities is, to me, kind of a sign of desperation on his part. I mean, I think he uses scare tactics, he uses fear, he uses deception, and he uses disinformation. That's his game, and you have to understand that. Russia has both strategic and tactical nuclear weapons. The more relevant ones in a case like we're talking about here with Ukraine would be his tactical weapons. But nobody is talking about that. I do think that one of the things we could see pretty quickly is an escalation in terms of cyber warfare. Them targeting America's power grid or financial system, those types of attacks, and I think we are doing everything we can right now to harden some of those targets, and then to think about how we retaliate. And that's an area of warfare that there's not much experience with so far, and so there aren't well-established rules of engagement. What's proportional if they attack us, if they launch a cyber attack against the United States. And you saw that earlier this year with the Colonial Pipeline. I mean, that was clearly evidence that the Russians and their some of the thugs around them are already targeting America's critical infrastructure. And so I think we have to be prepared for that. I think we have to be prepared for anything. But he knows. I mean, if you go down that nuclear path, I mean, that's Armageddon, and that's mutually assured destruction, which is what's acted as a deterrent through the years to bad behavior by people like him. And I don't think he's that crazy. But we have to be prepared to defend America, the American people, and in concert with our allies in Europe and the NATO alliance, freedom-loving people and democracies around the world. And this is going to be a very significant test, not only of that capability, but the desire and will and commitment to do it.
All living former presidents have responded to the situation going on in Ukraine. Former President Trump has weighed in on the matter as well, and he called Putin, among other things, savvy, and he said that the escalation sort of implied that it was an act of genius, I believe is what the way he put it. I would just want to get your view on that statement, and if there's a place for that assessment now in difference of all other presidential statements on the matter.
Well, I mean, I think former presidents are all entitled to their opinion, and I'm sure they all have their opinions. All I know is that Putin is a thug, and he is, this is a power play and a power grab, nothing more, nothing less, an attempt by him to not only for his ego, but to rebuild the so-called Russian Empire. And I think we have to treat it that way. I think we have to understand that his intentions here and what he says he may do or not do, in most cases he's going to be lying. Anytime his lips moving, he's going to be lying. And I think we have to take seriously the threat that exists here, not only immediately in Ukraine, but the broader European continent, and then also ultimately the United States, and treat it as such, because this is somebody who will stop at nothing. And I think we have to be completely, totally, utterly prepared to defend the American people and those that we have an obligation to defend under Article 5 of the NATO Treaty.
Absolutely. If there's, we got to wrap up here, but is there any way you can briefly just talk about what you think the next steps for the Biden administration and the United States to be?
Well, one, I'd say continue to pump lethal aid in there. It's looking like so far that the Ukrainian people are pretty dug in and are going to resist. And I think that so weaponry and giving them the types of assets and intelligence that would enable them and just make it really, really painful for Russia. I mean, Russia tries to get air dominance, and if we give them some intelligence, it enables them to shoot some of those assets out of the air. People on the streets in Ukraine, if they have weaponry and arms, they want to fight. And so I think it's it's everything we can to support that. And then I think crushing economic sanctions. And you know, we should have, and the administration has done it, and I give them credit for doing it now. They should have done it months ago. We tried to do it in the Senate. We had a vote on sanctioning the Putin pipeline. They've now determined, and Germany's no longer going to certify that pipeline. That's a huge thing. And then there are things that we can do, sanctions, that can be very, very painful. Now, they also have some collateral damage. And that's the thing, as we look at the menu of sanctions and things that we can do, it's always better to do them, you know, with our allies. We've tried unilateral sanctions on Russia before. They have some effect, but if you can do it with all of the NATO allies, I mean, that is a huge block of the economy, and on which Russia depends heavily. And then ultimately, there's a lot of talk about whether or not if they lose access to the dollar, you know, if they can no longer trade in dollars, it could crush the ruble. There are some things that we could do to make this incredibly painful. And I don't think you take any option off the table, and I don't think you tell an adversary what you will or won't do. I think you want them to assume that nothing is off the table and that all these are going to be options. And I think they will see how things proceed, to what length we and our allies are willing to go. But I hope we're willing to take whatever steps are necessary to prevail.
Senator Thune, thank you so much for your time. Always appreciate it.
Thanks, Nick. Good to be with you.
Thank you.